Don't look between my legs." Emily's voice was a ghost in the vast, empty prairie. It trembled with a fear that went deeper than modesty. She was begging for the last scrap of her dignity, the final, fragile piece of her humanity she still clung to. Her white dress, once clean and pressed, was now just rags. The ropes binding her had ripped the fabric with every jolt of the wagon. Each pull tore the cloth wider, leaving her bruised skin exposed to the biting wind and the merciless sun. Sweat and blood mixed on her face, tracing grimy paths through the dust. Her wrists were raw and bleeding where the ropes had dug in, carving deep lines into her flesh. Her ankles were swollen, protesting the constant strain. Every single rut in the godforsaken dirt road sent a new wave of agony through her body, a fire that started in her bonds and spread to every nerve. Jack Slater walked beside the wagon, and the look in his eyes was pure, cruel delight. He was in no hurry. He wanted to watch her break. He wanted to savor every moment of her suffering, to drink it in like fine whiskey. "Pretty little thing," he sneered, his grin as sharp and ugly as a rusty knife. "They'll pay double for you, maybe even triple." The wagon itself seemed to be in pain. It creaked and groaned with every turn of its wheels, a high, shrieking sound that sounded like a cry for mercy. Emily tried to scream again, but her throat was raw, and only a cracked, hoarse sound came out. Her voice was nothing out here, a whisper against the wind. In the wide, empty plains, her cries carried no weight at all. The prairie stretched on forever in every direction, an endless sea of yellow grass swaying in the hot, dry wind. There were no houses, no other riders. There was no mercy to be found. Her father was miles and miles away, probably sleeping soundly in his bed. He had no idea his only daughter had been snatched from her room under the black cover of night. No one had heard her. And now, no one would come. Jack climbed onto the wagon, and his shadow fell over her, a cold blanket of dread. He grabbed her chin with rough, calloused fingers, forcing her eyes to meet his. "You think someone's coming for you?" His voice was low, almost calm, and that made it 1,000 times worse. The quietness of his cruelty was the most terrifying thing about him. "They're not. You belong to me now, to me, until I sell you. That's your only future." Emily jerked her head away, but his grip tightened like a vice, digging into her jaw until her teeth ached. The sting of his touch burned worse than the ropes. She clenched her jaw, biting back a sob. She would not give him the satisfaction. She would not. But Jack was a patient man. He enjoyed the slow crumble of defiance. He loved to watch the light in a person's eyes go out, piece by painful piece. With a twisted smile that didn't reach his cold eyes, he leaned in close, his foul breath hot against her ear. "By sunrise," he whispered, the words like ice in her veins, "you'll wish you were dead." Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Her breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. The wagon rattled on, its wheels thudding over rocks, each jolt a fresh torment. Emily's eyes scanned the horizon, searching, begging for a sign of hope, a plume of dust, a distant rider, anything. But there was nothing. Only the fading sun bleeding across the sky, the endless empty road, and the sound of her captor's soft, cruel laughter. Her mind tried to escape, to flee back to the safety of the ranch. She saw her father's face, stern, but always kind. She heard the gentle sound of cowbells in the early morning fog. She smelled the bread baking in the kitchen, and heard the easy laughter of the ranch hands at dusk. It all felt like a dream now, a lifetime ago, a memory slipping through her desperate fingers. Tears she refused to shed for him now filled her eyes. They spilled over, hot against her cold skin. She whispered into the dry air, her voice barely more than the wind itself. "Please, someone save me." Jack just laughed again, a sound as sharp and ugly as breaking glass. He cracked his whip and the sound tore through the silence like a gunshot. The horses, startled, lunged forward. The wagon jolted violently. Emily's body slammed into the rough wooden boards. Pain exploded through her side, and black spots danced in her vision. She tasted the coppery tang of blood on her lips. The world spun in dizzying, nauseating circles as her last bit of strength drained away, leaving nothing behind but pure cold fear and the crushing, absolute weight of helplessness. The sky bled from orange to purple as twilight fell. The shadows grew long and distorted, stretching like grasping fingers across the land. Jack's figure loomed over her, a monster carved from pure malice. The ropes seemed to tighten with the falling temperature, digging deeper into her raw flesh. Her spirit, her will to fight, flickered like a dying candle flame in the wind. Even as the darkness swallowed the prairie whole, one question burned in her mind. Would this night be her last? Or was there someone, somewhere, who could change the course of her story? She didn't know it yet, but fate wasn't bringing a savior. Not yet. Fate had more cruelty in store, waiting just ahead in the suffocating shadows of the long night. Night fell fast and hard on the open prairie. Emily lay tied in the back of the wagon, each breath a shallow, painful effort. Every beat of her heart was a loud, desperate drum in her ears. The ropes cut deeper, and the cold night air bit at her exposed skin. Her mind was a fog of pain and strange, feverish half-dreams. She thought she heard voices on the wind, the distant thunder of hooves. Maybe it was just the blood rushing in her ears. Maybe it was just shadows. Then it happened. The sound of hooves. And it wasn't a dream. It was real, thundering up from behind them. Not one horse, but many. A whole posse. Jack's head snapped up, his casual cruelty vanishing in an instant, replaced by the wide, panicked eyes of a cornered animal. He cursed, a low, guttural sound, and yanked hard on the reins. The wagon jolted to a stop, throwing Emily hard against the sideboards. Her cry was muffled, lost in the sudden chaos of pounding hooves and the angry shouts of men. Jack looked back, pure terror scrawled across his face. These were not friends. These were not lawmen. He knew these men, and they wanted him dead. He acted fast. He scrambled into the back of the wagon and dragged Emily out, shoving her forward, using her trembling, broken body as a human shield. Her torn dress fluttered in the wind, a tattered white flag of surrender. She struggled weakly, her eyes wide with a new kind of terror, but Jack's grip was like iron. He was no longer her captor. He was her executioner. The riders closed in, their faces grim in the moonlight. They were a wall of dark shapes and gleaming steel. Then the gunfire started. The night exploded with sound. Bullets cracked through the air, sparking like angry fireflies against the iron trim of the wagon wheels. Jack shoved Emily down, crouching behind her, then suddenly let her go. For the first time, she understood with sickening clarity. He wasn't protecting himself with her. He was using her to buy time. He was a distraction. And when the bullets got too close, Jack made his choice. He threw her. With a guttural roar, he shoved her back into the empty, rattling wagon, lashed the horses into a panicked frenzy, and then he jumped, hitting the ground, running and disappearing into the darkness. The horses screamed, bolting into the night with the wagon careening wildly behind them. Wood screamed under the strain. The road twisted. A wheel caught on a rock. The axle snapped. And then came the sickening final crash. The wagon toppled sideways, flipping through the air, dragging Emily with it. Her body slammed against the hard, unforgiving ground. The sharp, splintered edge of a broken board tore into her side. Pain, white-hot and absolute, seared through her, and her world went black. Silence fell across the prairie. The riders, their true target now on the run, thundered off into the night, their shouts fading into the distance. They were chasing Jack. They didn't even glance at the wreck. They didn't care about the girl. The prairie grew still again, as if nothing had ever happened. But she was there, alone, bleeding. Her dress was nothing more than shredded cloth, clinging to her body like a second skin of dirt and blood. Her lips moved faintly, whispering a prayer that no one, not even God, seemed to hear. Hours passed. The moon climbed high into the ink-black sky, bathing her in its cold silver light. Emily drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind haunted by nightmares of Jack's cruel laughter and shadowy hands pulling her down, down, down into the dark. Her body shook with cold and shock. Her eyes would flutter open, but there was no one there, nothing but the endless grass and the indifferent stars. She was going to die out here. Alone. Then, the first pale rays of dawn touched the horizon. A horse nickered softly in the distance. Was it real, or just another dream before the end? The morning sun broke over the hills, spilling golden light across the prairie. Emily's body lay twisted and broken beside the wrecked wagon. Her breathing was a shallow whisper. Her dress was in tatters, her skin a canvas of bruises and dried blood. For hours she had drifted on a dark sea between feverish dreams and waking nightmares, half alive, half gone. Then she heard the sound again, a horse's steady hooves on the dry earth. It wasn't the angry thunder of a mob this time. It was just one horse, moving with a calm, sure-footed gait. The sound grew closer. Her eyelids fluttered. A desperate, weak movement, but she couldn't lift her head. She couldn't make a sound. John Carter was out early, guiding his old bay horse toward the river for water. At 58, his back was stiff, and his beard was more gray than black, but his eyes were as sharp as a hawk's. He had seen his share of trouble in his life. He'd seen outlaws and gunmen, and he'd seen the evil that men do when they think no one is watching. But nothing, in all his years, could have prepared him for what he saw that morning. His horse stopped, its ears twitching, suddenly uneasy. John frowned, his sharp eyes scanning the ground. Then he saw it, a dark trail of blood in the dust. It led straight to the overturned wagon near the riverbank. He dismounted, his boots crunching on the dry grass. He moved cautiously, his hand resting near the butt of his pistol. At first he thought it was a corpse, a young girl tangled in ropes and splintered wood. Her white dress was torn to rags, and her skin was covered in angry, purple marks. Her arm dangled lifelessly over the edge of the broken wagon bed, blood dried in a dark crust across her hand. John knelt beside her. His rough, weathered fingers gently brushed away the dirt and caked blood from her cheek. Her skin was cold, so cold. He thought for sure she was gone, but then he felt it. The faintest rise and fall of her chest. A breath so shallow it was barely there. She was alive. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice a low rumble, more to himself than to her. He reached for the hunting knife at his belt. With practiced ease, he began to saw through the thick ropes that bound her wrists. The fibers were soaked with blood where they had bitten deep into her skin. As the last rope fell away, Emily stirred. Her lips moved, forming silent words. Her eyes blinked open, but they were glazed with pain and a deep, animal fear. She looked straight at him, seeing not a man, but another monster. Her voice was a broken whisper, a sound that would haunt him for the rest of his days. Don't look between my legs." The words sent a chill through John Carter that had nothing to do with the morning air. It was a cold, hard fury that settled deep in his bones. He understood at once. He understood the kind of profound, soul-stealing evil she had endured. And in that silent moment, kneeling in the dust beside her broken body, he swore a silent, solemn oath. Whoever had done this would pay. They would pay in blood. He eased her down gently from the wreckage, taking off his heavy canvas coat and covering her shivering body. He gave her a small sip of water from his canteen, watching her cling to it like a lifeline. Her eyes, still wide with terror, searched his face, trying to understand. trying to see if this man was another devil or something else entirely. And for the first time since her nightmare began, she saw something she thought she had lost forever. She saw kindness in the eyes of a stranger. But the story was just beginning to unfold. The man who had saved her was not who he appeared to be. And the evil that had left her for dead was not as far away as she thought. In fact, it was already on its way back. The sun climbed higher, warming the riverbank where John had laid Emily to rest. He had cleaned her wounds as best he could, his touch surprisingly gentle for a man with such rough hands. Her breathing had steadied, but every pained wince on her face told him she was still trapped in a world of hurt. John didn't relax. He kept scanning the horizon, his instincts screaming at him. Instincts sharpened from a lifetime of knowing that trouble on the frontier never stays gone for long. And sure enough, trouble was already riding back. Jack Slater was not done. His escape the night before had bought him a few hours of freedom, but it had cost him his prize. Rage, black and bitter, had brought him back. He had to erase the only witness. He had to silence the girl who could put a rope around his neck. And more than that, he wanted revenge. Revenge on the rivals who had ambushed him, and revenge on whatever fool had stumbled upon what was his. John saw him first, a lone rider cutting a sharp line across the prairie, a plume of dust rising behind his horse like a warning signal. The old rancher's jaw tightened. His hand slid down, resting calmly on the worn leather grip of the Colt at his hip. At 58, his draw was slower than it had been in his youth. But his aim was just as true, and today he had more than just himself to protect. Jack dismounted with a wild, arrogant grin, his own revolver already in his hand. "Well, well," he called out, his voice slick with venom. "Looks like you found something that belongs to me, old man." John stepped forward, deliberately placing his body between Jack and the girl. He was a wall of quiet, stubborn resolve. "She belongs to nobody," he said, his voice low and even. "Not to you, not to any man." The tension cracked like dry wood in a fire. Jack raised his gun. The first shot rang out, loud and sharp in the morning stillness. John ducked, moving with a speed that defied his age. He returned fire, his Colt bucking in his hand. The two men circled each other, a deadly dance amidst the wreckage of the wagon. Bullets sparked off the broken wheels and whined off the river stones. Emily stirred at the terrible noise, her eyes flying open, wide with a fresh wave of terror. She was too weak to move, too weak to even cry out. She could only watch, trapped and helpless, as the man who had shown her kindness fought the monster from her nightmares. The fight shifted. Jack, out of bullets, lunged forward, slamming into John with the force of a battering ram. The guns tumbled into the dirt. Now it was fists, raw, brutal, and unforgiving. Jack swung wild, pure fury in every blow, but John fought with the cold, deadly precision of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Dust rose around them as they grappled, their grunts and the sickening thud of their blows echoing in the quiet air. The river glinted in the sun, a silent witness. At last, John saw an opening. He drove his fist hard into Jack's jaw. The crack of bone was audible. Jack staggered back, his eyes dazed, and fell sprawling in the dirt. John didn't hesitate. He scrambled for his gun, leveled it, and fired a single warning shot that kicked up dust inches from Jack's head. The outlaw froze, his eyes wide, his chest heaving. For the first time, Jack Slater, the bully, the tormentor, realized he had been beaten. John bound him with the very same ropes that had held Emily. He pulled the knots tight, his face carved from steel. "You'll face the law," John growled, his voice a low promise of pain. "And you'll pay for every tear she shed, and every scream she never got to make." Jack spat in the dirt, but for once he had nothing to say. The fight was gone from him. The fight was over. Emily watched through half-closed eyes, a wave of profound relief washing over her exhaustion. John turned back to her, his hard expression softening as he looked at her. "It's done," he said, his voice softer now. "You're safe." But as he said the words, he noticed something on the ground, half buried in the dirt where Jack had fallen. A small metal object glinting in the sun. He bent down and picked it up. It was a coin, but not currency. It was made of dull pewter, and stamped on its surface was a crude symbol, a coiled rattlesnake. John's blood ran cold. He knew that symbol. He knew it from a lifetime ago, from a past he had tried to bury deep. The men who had chased Jack Slater weren't just rivals. They were the Red Creek Gang, his old gang. The man who had rescued Emily wasn't just a simple rancher. He was a man with a dark and violent past, a past that had just ridden back into his life. The trouble wasn't over. It was just getting started. The dust had barely settled. John tied the groaning, defeated Jack Slater over his own saddle, then gently lifted Emily. She was light as a feather, her body limp with exhaustion. She was barely conscious, but as he settled her in front of him on his horse, her eyes fluttered open. She saw the grim set of his jaw, and then she saw the strange pewter coin he clutched in his hand. She didn't understand what it was, but she saw the look on his face. This was not the face of a man whose troubles were over. John guided the horse slowly, Jack's horse trailing behind them. The journey back to his ranch was silent, broken only by the steady plod of hooves and the vast, empty whisper of the prairie wind. There was no glory in this victory. There was only a cold, creeping dread, a duty to see this through, and a terrible feeling that seeing it through would cost him everything. By the time they arrived at his small, isolated ranch, Emily had slipped into a deep, restless sleep. John carried her inside, his movements careful and gentle, and laid her on his own clean bed. He covered her with a thick wool blanket. For the first time in days, she could rest without fear of a man's hand on her, but a new danger was gathering, a storm she couldn't yet see. That night, John sat by his fire, the outlaw locked securely in the barn, chained to a support beam. He stared into the crackling flames, the rattlesnake coin sitting on the mantelpiece, catching the firelight. He listened to the quiet, steady breathing of the girl asleep in the other room. At 58, he thought he had seen it all. He thought he had paid his penance. But this night, this girl, this coin, they proved him wrong. Life could still surprise you, and the ghosts of your past could always, always find you. The next morning, John rode into the small, dusty town, dragging a bound and sullen Jack Slater behind him. He delivered him to the sheriff, a lanky man named Miller with shifty eyes and a stained mustache. John told him the story, or at least part of it. He left out the ambush. He left out the coin. "There'll be a trial," Sheriff Miller said, his eyes not quite meeting John's. "Justice will be done." But John didn't trust him. He saw the flicker of something in the sheriff's eyes when he looked at Jack Slater. A flicker of recognition, of fellowship. John left the jailhouse with a knot in his stomach. The law on the frontier was never simple, and it was rarely clean. He returned to the ranch to find Emily awake. She was sitting up in bed, and her eyes were brighter than they had been before. The terror was still there deep down, but something else was beginning to grow in its place. Resilience. Her wounds were beginning to heal, and so it seemed was her spirit. Days turned into a week. Emily grew stronger. She was still too weak for heavy chores, but she insisted on helping. She fed his chickens. She helped him mend a fence. She sat on the porch in the evenings and watched him work with the cattle. She rarely spoke of what had happened. She didn't have to. The silence between them was filled with a quiet understanding. At first, her gratitude showed in small, shy smiles, but slowly it deepened into something more. A trust, a bond, the kind of profound connection that can only be forged in the fires of shared trauma and unexpected kindness. It was a feeling neither of them had expected. John felt it too, though he tried to hide it behind his weathered, stoic face. He was an old man. She was a young woman with her whole life ahead of her. He knew what the world would say. He knew how it would look. But the heart is a stubborn, foolish thing. It doesn't measure years. It only measures kindness. And in that, John had given her everything he had. But as he felt this new, fragile hope begin to bloom, the shadow of his past grew longer. One evening, as he was cleaning his rifle, his sleeve rode up. Emily, bringing him a cup of coffee, saw it. There, on his forearm, was a tattoo. Faded by time and sun, but still unmistakable. A coiled rattlesnake, the same symbol that was on the coin he'd hidden on the mantelpiece. Her blood ran cold. The coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the wooden floor. Her voice was a choked whisper. "Who are you?" The man who saved her. The man she was beginning to trust, to care for. He was one of them. The kindness in his eyes was a lie. His gentleness was a mask. He hadn't saved her. He had just changed her captor. Her world, which had just begun to piece itself back together, shattered all over again. Emily stared at the faded tattoo on John's arm, the coiled rattlesnake a venomous brand that seemed to mock her. The shattered pieces of the coffee cup lay at her feet, a perfect mirror of her own broken trust. Her breath hitched in her throat, her mind racing, connecting the dots. The ambush, the coin he had so quickly hidden away, this mark on his skin. It all pointed to one horrifying conclusion. "You're one of them," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. She backed away from him, her hand flying to her throat as if to ward off a blow. The image of his kind face, his gentle hands twisted in her mind, becoming the mask of a monster. "You didn't save me. You just took me from him." The pain in her voice was a physical blow, worse than any bullet. John flinched, his face crumbling. He looked down at the tattoo on his arm, a mark of shame he had carried for 30 years, and then back at her terrified face. "Emily, no," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "It's not what you think. That was a long time ago. Another life." He took a step toward her, his hands held out in a placating gesture, but she recoiled as if he were on fire. "Don't touch me!" He stopped, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He knew how it looked. He knew he had no right to ask for her trust, but he had to try. He had to make her understand. "The Red Creek Gang," he began, his voice low and heavy with the weight of memory. "I rode with them when I was your age, a stupid, angry kid with nothing to lose. We were thieves, not what they are now, not what Jack Slater is." He gestured vaguely toward the barn where the outlaw had been chained. "The gang changed. The leader, a man named Silas, he got meaner, more vicious. He started taking things that weren't just money or cattle." John's eyes were distant, lost in a painful past. "One day we raided a homestead. Silas. He did to the farmer's daughter what Slater did to you. I watched. I didn't stop him. I was a coward." The confession came out in a ragged breath, a poison he had held inside for decades. "That was the day I left. I rode away and never looked back. I bought this ranch. I tried to become a man who could live with himself. I tried to atone." He finally looked at her, his eyes pleading. "When I found you, when you said what you said, it was like I was back there again, seeing what I was too afraid to stop, saving you. It wasn't about a reward. It wasn't a trick. It was a chance to finally do the right thing, to be the man I should have been all those years ago." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. She wanted to believe him. Every fiber of her being that had learned to trust him over the past week screamed that he was telling the truth. But the fear, the betrayal, it was a cold, hard knot in her stomach. Before she could answer, Before she could decide whether to run or to believe, the sound of hoofbeats interrupted them. Not one horse this time, several, riding fast. John's head snapped up, his body instantly tense. He strode to the window, peering out into the twilight. "It's the sheriff," he said, but there was no relief in his voice. "He's got a posse with him." Emily's heart leaped with a sudden, desperate hope. The law was here. The real law. Maybe this nightmare was finally over. Sheriff Miller and 3 deputies dismounted in the yard. They moved with a swaggering confidence, their hands resting on their pistols. Miller strode up to the porch, his eyes skipping over Emily and landing on John. "Carter," the sheriff said, his voice flat. "Got a warrant here for your arrest." John stared at him, his face a mask of disbelief. "Arrest? For what?" "For the kidnapping of Emily here," Miller said with a smug grin, "and for the murder of Jack Slater." "Murder?" John sputtered. "He's alive! I handed him over to you myself." "Funny," Miller said, shaking his head slowly. "We found him dead in his cell this morning, hanged. Looks like you didn't tie your loose ends tight enough, Carter. Figured you'd come back to silence him, but you didn't have to. Looks like he silenced himself." He paused, letting the lie hang in the air. Or maybe someone helped him. Either way, Slater's partner came forward, told us the whole story, told us how you, an old member of the Red Creek gang, double-crossed him to steal his prize. It was a perfect lie, a perfect trap. The sheriff wasn't here to bring justice. He was here to clean up the mess for the gang. Slater was dead. John Carter, the ex-member who knew their secrets, would be hanged for the crime, and the only witness, the girl, would be taken as evidence, back into the hands of the very evil she had escaped. "It's a lie," Emily cried out, finding her voice. "John saved me. Slater is the one who took me." Sheriff Miller gave her a patronizing smile. Now, miss. We know you're confused, traumatized. Carter here, he's a snake. He probably filled your head with all sorts of stories. Don't you worry. We'll take you somewhere safe." The deputies were moving now, flanking John, their guns drawn. John didn't move. He just stood there, his face ashen, realizing he had been completely outmaneuvered. His past had not just caught up with him, it had wrapped itself around his neck like a noose. He had tried to be a good man, but in the end, the snake on his arm was the only thing they would ever see. He was trapped. They were both trapped. The deputies grabbed John's arms, shoving him forward roughly. The cold steel of handcuffs snapped around his wrists. Emily screamed, a raw, desperate sound of protest. "No! You can't! He's innocent!" Sheriff Miller ignored her. He turned to one of his men. "Get the girl! Put her on a horse! We're taking them both in!" One of the deputies started toward Emily, a greasy smile on his face. This was it. The nightmare was starting all over again. She was being handed from one monster to the next, and the man who had tried to save her was being destroyed because of it. All the pain, all the terror, all the helpless fury of the past week coalesced inside her. It rose up like a hot, burning fire. She was not a prize. She was not evidence. She was not a victim anymore. As the deputy reached for her, Emily moved. She wasn't thinking. She was pure instinct, pure survival. She dodged his grasp, spun around, and ran. Not for the prairie, not to escape. She ran back into the small ranch house. "Get her!" Miller yelled, annoyed. The deputy chased after her. He burst through the door, expecting to find her cowering in a corner. But Emily wasn't cowering. She was standing by the fireplace, and in her hands, she held John's heavy Colt revolver, the one he'd left on the table after cleaning it. She held it with both hands to steady it, the barrel shaking but pointed straight at the deputy's chest. The man froze, his eyes wide with shock. "Put that down, girl. You don't know how to use that." "I know which end the bullet comes out of," she said, her voice trembling but clear and cold as ice. Outside, Sheriff Miller grew impatient. "What's taking so long in there?" He started for the door, but just as he reached the porch, a new sound cut through the tense standoff. The thunder of more hooves, a lot more. A large group of riders crested the hill, riding hard for the ranch. At the front was a stern-faced, gray-haired man, Emily's father. He and his ranch hands had been searching for days, and the news of Jack Slater's capture and subsequent suicide had finally led them here. They reined in their horses, taking in the scene in an instant. John Carter in chains, the shifty-eyed sheriff, the deputy frozen in the doorway, and inside, his daughter, holding a gun. "What in God's name is going on here?" Emily's father roared, his hand already on his own sidearm. The standoff had just become a siege. The sheriff's perfect plan had just exploded in his face. He was outnumbered, and his lies were about to be dragged out into the light. The justice he had twisted to serve his own corruption was about to come for him, swift and unforgiving, from the barrel of a girl's gun and the righteous fury of a father's love. The moment stretched, thin and tight as a wire. Inside, Emily held the deputy at bay, the weight of the Colt a heavy, solid reality in her hands. Outside, her father and a dozen armed ranch hands faced off against Sheriff Miller and his remaining 2 men. The balance of power had shifted in a heartbeat. "Sheriff," Emily's father said, his voice dangerously calm as he dismounted, "I suggest you explain why my daughter is holding a gun on your man, and why this man," he gestured with his chin toward John, "is in chains." Miller, realizing his trap had sprung on himself, tried to bluff his way out. "This man, Carter, is a known associate of the Red Creek Gang. He kidnapped your daughter from Jack Slater. He's a dangerous criminal." "That's a lie!" Emily's voice rang out from the doorway. She stepped out onto the porch, still holding the gun, though no longer pointing it. Her eyes found her father's. "Papa, that man saved my life. He fought Jack Slater. He brought him to the sheriff. This sheriff," she said, her voice filled with contempt, "is the real criminal. He's working with them." Her father looked from his daughter's fierce, determined face to John's weary, stoic one. He saw the faded brand on John's arm and his eyes narrowed. Then he looked at the shifty, sweating sheriff. He had been a rancher in this territory for 30 years. He knew a straight man from a crooked one. "Take the cuffs off him," he ordered his men. 2 of his ranch hands moved forward, rifles leveled at the deputies. Miller's men, seeing they were hopelessly outgunned, raised their hands. The cuffs were removed from John's wrists. He rubbed the raw flesh, his eyes never leaving Emily. He saw not a fragile victim, but a survivor, a fighter. The truth came out in a torrent. John, his voice steady, told them everything. His past with the gang, why he left, finding Emily, the fight with Slater, and the sheriff's obvious lies. Emily filled in the gaps, her voice shaking but strong, corroborating every word. When they were done, silence fell over the yard. Emily's father walked over to Sheriff Miller, who was now being held at gunpoint by a formidable-looking ranch hand. He looked the sheriff dead in the eye. "You brought corruption to this town, Miller. You preyed on my family. You will be taken to the federal marshal in the capital, and you will hang." The corrupt lawman and his deputies were bound and tied. The fight was truly over. In the aftermath, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Emily's father approached John Carter. The 2 men stood for a long moment, sizing each other up. "You have that mark on your arm," the father said, his voice a low rumble. "You rode with them." It wasn't a question. "I did," John said simply. "It's a part of who I was. It's not who I am." "My daughter seems to believe that," her father said, his gaze drifting to where Emily was talking quietly with one of the ranch hands, her face finally, truly at peace. "She trusts you, after what she's been through. That trust is not something she gives lightly." He paused, his gaze returning to John. "You saved her life. For that, my family owes you a debt we can never repay." He extended his hand. John looked at the offered hand, then at the man's stern but honest face. He shook it. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even acceptance. It was something more valuable. It was a beginning. Weeks later, the dust had settled. The corrupt sheriff and his men were gone, facing federal justice. The Red Creek gang, with its leadership exposed, had scattered to the winds. The prairie was quiet again. Emily did not return to her father's ranch right away. She stayed with John, helping him with his chores, sharing quiet meals and talking late into the night by the fire. The horror she had endured had left scars, deep ones that would never fully fade. But in the quiet kindness of the old rancher, in the shared understanding of a dark past and a chosen light, she found a way to heal. And John, the man who thought his best days were long behind him, the man who believed he was doomed to live out his life alone with his ghosts, found a new reason to fight. He found redemption, not in a grand act of heroism, but in the quiet, steady rhythm of a shared life. He found it in the trust of a young woman who had seen the worst of him and still chose to see the best. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was something realer and far more beautiful. It was a story of two broken people who, in the vast, unforgiving emptiness of the frontier, found a way to save each other. Even in the darkest of nights, a single act of kindness can be a light. True strength isn't found in the power to hurt, but in the choice to protect. And sometimes love can bloom in the most unlikely, most desolate of places, proving that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. If you were in that yard, would you have believed John's story, seeing the brand on his arm? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And if this story from the Wild West moved you, do me a favor and hit that like button. And be sure to subscribe, because every story we tell here carries a lesson, and you won't want to miss the next one.